At first, nothing looks broken. The street lamps still shine on wet stone, shops still open their doors, workers still carry wages home in their pockets. But something essential has already failed. Berlin, 1923. A woman hurries to buy bread before the price changes again. Clerks mark up the numbers before the day is over. Men carry banknotes in bundles large enough to look absurd, then terrifying. This is the first lie monetary collapse tells, that money is still alive because it is still moving. But money is not paper. Money is a shared belief about what tomorrow will honor. And when a society begins to doubt that promise, cash turns into printed delay. Prices lose memory. Savings lose meaning. Everyday life becomes a race against the clock. That is how a monetary system starts to die. The printing press is the part everyone blames because it is loud. You can see the paper. You can count the notes. You can watch prices rise and tell yourself the cause must be obvious. But monetary collapse rarely begins where the public is looking. The real break starts earlier and deeper. It begins in ledgers that no longer balance, in taxes that no longer arrive on time, in debts that can no longer be rolled without fear, in a state that still issues commands but struggles to make society absorb the cost. The printer is visible. The deeper failure is not. A currency does not first die from ink. It begins to die when the fiscal core weakens, when obligations outrun extraction, and when the state loses its grip over the promises that hold daily life together. A monetary system collapses when the state can no longer do four things at once: collect, borrow, enforce, and preserve belief. That is the core. Not because money is paper, but because money is accepted order. It is the quiet agreement that wages will still buy food, that taxes will still settle obligations, that contracts will still matter, and that tomorrow will still recognize what today was worth. When a state can still raise revenue, roll debt, impose losses, and keep the public inside a shared financial reality, a currency can survive even ugly numbers. But when that capacity weakens, money begins to change. It stops acting like trust and starts acting like risk. That is when a monetary system starts to fail. Not when notes are printed, but when authority can no longer hold value, obedience, and expectation together. Here is the paradox that confuses almost every public conversation about money. Some states print enormous sums and survive. Others break before the presses ever become the main event. So the question is not simply how much paper was issued. The real question is, what stood behind that paper when pressure arrived? Did the state still command taxes? Did creditors still believe they would be repaid? Did courts, ministries, and banks still carry enough authority to keep society inside the same financial story? Because money does not collapse by quantity alone. It collapses when the power behind it weakens. That is why one country can absorb years of ugly balance sheets, while another enters crisis with terrifying speed. The surface is money. The structure underneath is power. And that is where the real danger lives. Spain looked rich enough to defy arithmetic. In the 16th century, silver crossed the Atlantic in astonishing volume. Galleons arrived from the New World heavy with metal, and the monarchy wore that flow like proof of destiny. From a distance, it looked like inexhaustible power. But empires do not survive on spectacle. They survive on systems. And Spain's system was weaker than its treasure made it appear. The crown could draw silver from abroad, but it struggled to build a broad, reliable tax base at home. Its imperial commitments were vast, its wars were expensive, its court spent as if future shipments had already arrived. So the monarchy borrowed against expected silver, turning incoming treasure into collateral for present ambition. That is the detail that matters. Spain did not suffer because it lacked money. It suffered because it lacked durable fiscal capacity. Silver could fill chests. It could not repair the structure underneath them. Again and again, the crown moved wealth through the empire without building a stable foundation strong enough to carry the cost of empire itself. And when revenues at home remained narrow while obligations kept expanding, the gleam of silver began to hide a deeper fragility. From the outside, Spain looked magnificent. From the inside, it was financing power with metal, debt, and delay. That is why the story matters. Precious metal can strengthen a state. It cannot save one that never learned how to extract, organize, and sustain power on its own soil.
This is the mechanism Spain reveals. A state can look rich in motion and still be weak at the core. Money can pour in from abroad, ships can arrive full, vaults can swell, victories can expand the map, and still, the structure underneath can remain fragile. Because incoming wealth is not the same thing as durable fiscal strength. Silver can enter a kingdom. It cannot by itself teach the state how to tax broadly, collect reliably, and sustain power through ordinary years as well as ambitious ones. That is the distinction. A government may survive on windfalls for a while. It cannot build lasting monetary stability on them. War can bring glory. Treasure can buy time. Neither can replace a balanced fiscal base. Spain matters because it exposes a pattern that repeats across history. States do not fail only when money runs out. They fail when stable extraction never matures beneath visible wealth. That is when abundance becomes dependence, and dependence becomes fragility. Now move to Britain after the First World War, and notice the contrast. This is where the story becomes more useful, because not every monetary crisis ends in death. Sometimes a system bends hard, punishes millions, and still survives. Britain returned to gold in 1925 at the old pre-war parity, as if the war had been a detour rather than a rupture. It was an elegant decision on paper. In practice, it forced the pound into a strength the economy could no longer carry. Prices came under pressure, industry strained, unemployment spread. Workers paid the cost through deflation, lost wages, and social conflict. The country did not feel stable. It felt squeezed. And yet, the monetary system did not collapse. That distinction matters. Britain suffered real pain, but it still possessed something deeper than comfort. Fiscal credibility, institutional continuity, and a state that could still function under pressure. Taxes still came in. The government could still borrow. The courts still mattered. The administrative core remained intact. So the burden was brutal, but legible. Society could still see who ruled, how obligations were settled, and what the currency still meant. That is why Britain is so important to this story. It shows that monetary pain is not the same thing as monetary death. A society can endure unemployment, strikes, and bitter adjustment without losing its money entirely. If the structure beneath the currency still holds, the system may survive, even while the people inside it bleed.
This is the distinction that matters most. A country can suffer a brutal monetary crisis and still avoid monetary death. Those are not the same event. Pain is not the same thing as collapse. A society may endure unemployment, falling wages, strikes, bankruptcies, and years of bitterness. Shops may close. Families may shrink their world. Politics may turn harsher. The public may feel abandoned. And still, the currency may survive. Why? Because what keeps money alive is not comfort. It is continuity. If the state still functions through the pain, the system can bend without snapping. If taxes are still collected, if debt can still be issued in the country's own currency, if courts still enforce contracts, if ministries still administer losses, then money remains inside an operating structure of authority. That is the dividing line. A painful crisis becomes monetary collapse only when the institutions beneath the currency begin to fail with it. When the legal core still holds, people may hate the adjustment, but they can still understand the rules. They still know who governs, what must be paid, and what the currency still means. And that legibility matters more than comfort. Because money does not survive by being loved. It survives by remaining enforceable.
Now we arrive at the case that haunts almost every conversation about inflation. Germany, 1923. And this is exactly why it is so often misunderstood. Because people remember the wheelbarrows. They remember the banknotes. They remember prices exploding so fast that money seemed to rot in plain sight. But by the time the paper was everywhere, the deeper structure had already been breaking for years. Germany was not simply a country that printed too much. It was a defeated state carrying reparations it could not easily bear. A political order already under strain, an economy weakened by war, and, in 1923, a nation hit again when French and Belgian troops occupied the Ruhr, the industrial heart of the country. That mattered enormously, because when output falls, tax capacity falls with it. And when tax capacity falls, while obligations remain, the fiscal core begins to crack. Germany paid workers in the Ruhr to resist occupation. Production dropped, revenue weakened, foreign obligations remained, and the state found itself trying to meet external demands in forms of value it could not simply create by decree. That is the part worth holding on to. The press did not begin the disaster. It entered after the system had already lost altitude. By then, taxation was failing, borrowing was constrained, output was damaged, and confidence was thinning. The state could still print marks. It could not print restored credibility. It could not print industrial recovery. It could not print foreign exchange. It could not print trust back into a fractured society. So yes, hyperinflation came, violently, humiliatingly, publicly. Wages had to be spent at once. Savings dissolved. Ordinary rhythm broke apart. Daily life became a race against time, then a race against meaning itself. But the explosion was not the origin. It was the final visible detonation of a deeper fiscal, political, and productive collapse. That is why Germany 1923 matters so much. It shows with almost unbearable clarity that monetary death does not start when prices go vertical. It starts when a state can no longer extract enough, produce enough, borrow enough, or command enough belief to hold its obligations together. Here is the line worth remembering. Hyperinflation is the funeral, not the murder. By the time prices are exploding in public, the deeper damage has usually already been done. Money does not first die in the marketplace. It dies when the state loses real command over resources, credit, and belief. When it can no longer draw enough from the economy beneath it. When it can no longer borrow without fear. When it can no longer persuade people that today's money will still mean something tomorrow. That is the fatal sequence. The notes come later. The spectacle comes later. The humiliation comes later. What kills a currency is not visibility.
It is the slow collapse of practical power underneath it. And once that power breaks, paper only reveals what authority can no longer hide.
Now bring the pattern forward to Argentina in 2001, where monetary collapse no longer looked imperial or distant. It looked modern. That is what makes it so unsettling. In the 1990s, Argentina tied the peso to the US dollar 1-to-1. For a while, the arrangement felt like discipline made visible. Prices stabilized, confidence returned. Money looked trustworthy again because the promise behind it seemed simple and hard. But pegs do not create strength. They borrow it. And borrowed stability becomes dangerous when the economy underneath begins to slow. Growth weakened, debt accumulated. Too much of it sat in dollars, so the promise that had restored confidence slowly turned into a trap. Because once your obligations are hard and external, but your economy is soft and domestic, every shock starts to matter more. Investors grow colder. Banks grow fragile. Citizens begin to wonder whether the money in the system is really theirs. Then trust begins to leave in stages. First from markets, then from banks, then from the public mind. That is when a monetary order becomes frighteningly modern. Not with wheelbarrows, but with frozen accounts, broken promises, and a population suddenly unsure whether the state can still protect the boundary between money and panic. This is how the crisis spreads. Not all at once, not as a single dramatic event, as a chain. First, the deficit widens. The state spends more than it can reliably extract, and the gap stops looking temporary. Then, borrowing gets harder. Creditors demand more. Rollovers become less certain. Interest rises, not just as a number, but as a signal that trust is becoming expensive. Then, reserves begin to thin. The state has fewer buffers, less room, less time. Banks come under pressure next, because they sit between public confidence and sovereign weakness. They hold the paper. They absorb the fear. They become the place where a fiscal problem starts turning into a social one. And then, the most dangerous shift begins. People change the unit inside their minds. They stop thinking in the national currency. They start thinking in dollars, gold, goods, rent, fuel, bread. That is the turning point. Because once a society stops measuring life in its own money, the currency begins to lose its coordinating power. It no longer organizes wages, savings, contracts, and expectation in the same shared language. And when money stops coordinating, panic stops being private. It becomes systemic. This is why most monetary systems do not die. Not because they are healthy, because they adapt before they collapse, usually in ugly ways. States do not choose death first. They choose distortion. They allow inflation to do part of the work slowly. They tighten access to capital. They pressure domestic banks to hold more state paper. They restructure debt in quieter language. They move losses around the system until no single moment looks like the end. That is how survival often works in monetary history. Not as dignity, as managed damage. The public feels it as a long squeeze rather than a clean break. Savings erode, credit tightens, growth weakens. Banks become more captive. The rules grow less fair, but they remain rules. And that matters. Because a flawed system can survive for a very long time if it can still distribute pain, enforce obedience, and keep enough of society inside the same financial frame. That is the hidden answer in the second half of the title. Most systems do not collapse because collapse is expensive for elites too. So instead of letting money die quickly, they make society absorb the adjustment slowly. Now take the expectation and turn it over again.
Japan carried enormous public debt for years, and yet the yen did not simply dissolve. That matters because it forces a harder question. If debt alone were enough to kill money, Japan should have broken long ago. It did not. Not because arithmetic stopped mattering, because structure still mattered more. Much of the debt remained anchored at home. Domestic savings were deep. Institutions were stable. The state could still fund itself inside its own currency, and the market for government debt remained thick enough to absorb strain without instantly turning panic into collapse. The same lesson appeared again after 2008 and again after 2020. Balance sheets expanded. Central banks intervened. States borrowed on a massive scale. And still, many developed systems remained standing. Why? Because the fiscal machinery was still alive. Taxes could still be collected. Debt could still be issued. Losses could still be distributed. The legal core still held. That is the second shock to intuition. A monetary system can survive ugly numbers for a very long time if the coercive, legal, and financial structure beneath it remains intact.
Final test.
Which means the real question is not whether the balance sheet looks frightening. It is whether the state behind it still works.
So if you want a colder checklist than the internet usually gives you, stop asking only whether a country is printing money. That is not the first question. Ask whether the state can still collect taxes. Ask what currency its debts are denominated in. Ask who actually holds that debt. Ask whether institutions can still make decisions under pressure, or whether politics has turned every adjustment into paralysis. Those are the real indicators. Because a government that still extracts revenue, borrows in its own currency, and operates through functioning courts, ministries, and banks has room to absorb shock. A government that cannot do those things is already more fragile than the headlines may admit. This is the shift in perspective. Do not look first at the noise. Look at the structure beneath the noise. Money becomes dangerous when the state behind it loses the machinery that makes obligation believable. And that is why the smartest question is never simply, are they printing? It is, does the system still work? This is the point where the balance sheet enters the kitchen. Not as theory, as bread. Prices rise first in the places people cannot ignore. Food, fuel, rent. The things that do not wait politely for policy to recover. Wages try to follow, but they rarely move with the same speed. So the distance between earning and living begins to widen. That distance is where social damage starts. Savings lose weight. Cash loses dignity. The middle class, which believed it was storing time and safety, discovers it was storing exposure. And the people hit first are usually the ones least protected. Those paid in cash. Those living paycheck to paycheck. Those too old, too poor, or too ordinary to hedge. They do not experience monetary decline as a debate. They experience it as smaller meals, delayed medicine, postponed plans, and a quiet humiliation inside ordinary errands. This is how money changes society when it begins to fail. It does not just reorder prices. It reorders security, class, patience, and fear. And once that happens, the crisis is no longer sitting in the treasury. It is sitting at the dinner table. This is the moment money stops being national, even before the banknotes disappear. A society begins to think in something else. Gold, dollars, fuel, flour, rent, anything that feels more solid than the unit printed by its own state. And that is not a minor change in habit.
It is a civilizational shift in trust. Because once people stop measuring life in the national currency, they are no longer fully living inside the same monetary house. The shared unit that once organized wages, savings, contracts, and expectation begins to fracture. A salary is still paid, but no longer believed. A savings account still exists, but no longer reassures. A contract is still written, but both sides silently translate it into something harder, safer, less fragile. That is how money changes society when it starts to crack. It does not only distort price, it distorts memory, planning, class behavior, and the meaning of obligation itself.
The official currency
People
still
begin to
survives on
hedge
paper,
privately
but underneath,
against the
the
public
second
order.
society trades in a
The
different
official
unit of
currency
trust.
remains on paper, but a second society starts forming underneath it. One that thinks in escape routes. And once that happens, the crisis is no longer just monetary. It becomes social fragmentation, measured in money. This is where monetary crisis stops being only about money. It becomes a question of sovereignty. Because once a state can no longer meet its obligations on its own terms, it begins to lose control over its own future. Creditors do not always arrive with armies. Sometimes they arrive with conditions, with oversight, with restructuring terms, with demands on revenue, spending, reserves, and law. And little by little, the state discovers that the most important parts of policy are no longer fully its own. That is the deeper injury. Not just that debt is heavy, but that debt begins to govern. Revenue streams get tied up. Budgets are written for survival rather than choice. Domestic priorities bend around external judgment. The language of sovereignty remains, but the room for sovereignty narrows. This is why monetary breakdown belongs to the history of power, not only the history of prices. A country that cannot pay may still keep its flag, its parliament, its ministries. But if its fiscal future is being negotiated from outside, part of its autonomy has already been repossessed. That is what makes collapse so politically serious. When money breaks, the damage does not stop at the treasury. It reaches into law, policy, borders, and time itself. Because a sovereign state is supposed to decide how tomorrow is financed. When it can no longer do that, monetary weakness becomes a quieter form of subordination. And then it happens. Not always as a grand collapse, often as a small administrative rupture that tells the truth all at once. A bond auction fails. A payment is delayed. A withdrawal limit appears. On paper, each event looks narrow, technical, manageable. In reality, they are alarms, because these are the moments when the state stops behaving like a sovereign system and starts behaving like an entity buying time. A failed auction means confidence did not arrive when called. A delayed payment means the schedule of obligation has started to slip. A withdrawal limit means the boundary between private money and public fear has already been breached. That is the moment the public begins to understand something is no longer normal. Not through theory, through interruption. The machine still exists. The buildings are still open. The officials are still speaking. But the rhythm is broken. And when the rhythm breaks, trust changes direction very quickly. People stop waiting. They move. They withdraw. They convert. They rush. That is why the breaking point is often small in form, but enormous in meaning. It is the instant when a system that looked strained suddenly reveals that it can no longer operate on ordinary terms.
So let's define collapse more precisely. Monetary collapse is not the moment prices move fastest. It is the moment money stops being trusted as a tool of social organization. That is the real threshold. A currency can survive inflation. It can survive ugliness. It can survive years of distortion. What it cannot survive is the loss of its role as the shared language through which a society prices work, stores time, settles obligations, and imagines tomorrow. Once that trust breaks, the damage is no longer only economic. Wages still exist, but they do not anchor life. Contracts still exist, but they do not stabilize expectation. Savings still exist, but they do not calm fear. The notes may still circulate, but the social function underneath them has begun to die. That is what collapse really means. Not the loudest number, the quiet death of a shared monetary reality.
Now bring this back to the present, carefully. Not every strange system is dying. That is where mature analysis begins. A country can carry ugly debt, rising prices, political anger, and years of distortion without entering true monetary collapse. Large systems often have buffers that weaker states do not. They still collect taxes. They still operate through law. They still borrow through deep domestic and international debt markets. And they still possess the administrative power to spread losses across society before the system itself gives way. That does not make them healthy. It makes them durable. And durability matters. Because a monetary system does not need to be fair in order to survive. It does not need to be elegant. It does not need to protect everyone equally. It only needs enough coercive, legal, and fiscal capacity to keep the structure operating under stress. So the serious question is not, is everything fine? It is, what still holds? If taxes still arrive, if courts still function, if debt can still be placed, and if the state can still force painful adjustment onto the public, then collapse may remain far away, even while ordinary life grows harder. That is the calmer reading, and it is usually the more accurate one. So here is the lens to keep. The next time someone says, it's over, they're printing, do not stop at the headline. Look beneath it. Ask what currency the state actually owes in. Ask how deep the tax base really is. Ask whether institutions can still make decisions under pressure. Ask whether society can still be coordinated when losses have to be imposed. Those are the questions that matter. Because a country with external obligations it cannot control is more fragile than one that borrows mainly in its own currency. A country with weak tax extraction is more fragile than one that can still pull revenue from the economy beneath it. A country with theatrical politics but functioning courts, banks, ministries, and debt markets may still endure far longer than the public expects. And a country that can still organize sacrifice, however unfairly, still has room to survive. That is the real shift in perspective. Do not read monetary stress like a spectator chasing noise. Read it like a historian of power. Because the fate of money is rarely decided by the printer alone. It is decided by obligation, capacity, and whether the state can still keep society inside one enforceable financial reality.
In the end, money does not live because it is made of paper, or gold, or numbers on a screen. It lives because a society continues to accept a deeper promise, that tomorrow someone will still collect, someone will still pay, someone will still enforce, someone will still record what is owed. That is the real foundation. Not the object itself, but the continuity of obligation.
And that is why monetary history always becomes social history. Because when that promise holds, people can plan, they can save, they can sign contracts, they can delay gratification. They can imagine a future that belongs to the same moral and financial world as the present. But when that promise weakens, money begins to lose more than value. It loses authority. It loses memory. It loses the power to keep millions of strangers inside one shared structure of expectation. That is the quiet grandeur and the quiet danger of money. It is never just currency. It is society agreeing that tomorrow will still count.
Monetary systems rarely die from a single shock. They die when the structure of power behind them can no longer hold collective trust together. That is the colder truth. Not one headline, not one printer, not one bad month. A long weakening of authority, capacity, obedience, and belief. And when that finally breaks, money does not just fail as an asset, it fails as a shared map of reality. People still live in the same country. They still walk the same streets. They still speak the same language. But they stop trusting the same promises. They stop counting value the same way. They stop imagining tomorrow inside the same financial order. That is why monetary collapse is never only about money. It is about the moment a society can no longer fully agree on what is real, what is owed, and what will still count in the morning. And once that agreement begins to dissolve, the currency is not the only thing that starts to die.